Happy politics, and welcome to what I know is your favorite BC politics podcast. This is BC Poly Hot Stove. And before I introduce my co-host, I will start by saying, yes, I am feeling a little under the weather this week. You can hear it in my voice. But Jordan, time, the tides, and BC politics wait for no man. And so here we are sallying forth. My name is Maclean K. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Orca, and I'm joined in a socially distant manner by...
It's Jordan Bateman, VP Communications, the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association, and happy 150th BC birthday to you, Maclean. A fine British Columbia.
Indeed. Where were you when BC turned 150? You were watching the show, which is, an appropriate way to celebrate, I think.
Exactly. Now, old Langley people like me will remember that I think the declaration to make BC a crown colony was 1858. So I believe we celebrated in 2008 the sesquicentennial in Fort Langley. I remember this because I was a young township councillor. Premier Campbell showed up to do it, to welcome, and they had a little cabinet meeting in Fort Langley somewhere. Rich Coleman wore his stovepipe hat. I'm not sure why. But anyways, it was those were good times all around, and yes. But now this is the actual, we are admitted into Confederation anniversary, so time's flying.
Absolutely, and anytime you get to use the word sesquicentennial, it's a good day. It's a Hall of Fame fun word to say.
Anti-penultimate and sesquicentennial are just the most obscenely, overly academic words that I like to splice into conversation when I can.
Well, let's try and work both of them in today. Let's start with what is the top story, unfortunately, across much of the province, and that is the wildfires. We've discussed this, I think, the last 2 weeks. Last week, we were talking about how Lytton has been wiped off the map, and fires threatened large chunks of Kamloops. I mean, it would take longer than we have here to detail where the fires are burning, so we'll not do that. You should go look at the BC wildfire map for yourself. It's very sobering stuff. The story, though, Jordan, is there have been persistent calls for the province to declare a state of emergency, and these have been building for about 2 weeks now. Both opposition parties, the heads of local and regional governments, the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, again, more people than I can name here. The province has dug in its heels a bit. What's going on here?
I don't know. I just do not I do not understand the political calculation that John Horgan and the NDP are making on this. It's very clear. Lytton didn't just burn to the ground. 2 people died. Yeah. That is an emergency by definition. When a town burns to the ground, especially a historic one like Lytton, well, any town, but a historic one like Lytton, and people actually perish, that is an emergency. A Soyuz, there's a fire across the lake. They were now starting to evacuate tourists out of that town. So it's a pretty important tourist destination for British Columbians. Coquihalla, it's threatened with closure at one point because there's a fire a couple kilometers off the highway now. Deanie Moore's written about 100 Mile House, and it goes on and on and on and on. And I do not understand Horgan's stubbornness on this. Even if he really in his heart of heart believes that no more resources could be possibly mustered than they're already mustering, you still do it in order to send a word to almost to send an act of faith to the rest of the province. Hey, we hear you, we're on this, we're giving you everything we can, and we'll give you more, whatever we can do. It's just, I do not understand the politics behind this, and he seems to be getting worse about it. He was on Sportsnet 650 radio yesterday, and he's like, "Wow, the Lower Mainland's fine." Kind of sort of half-heartedly quipping, and you're like, "Dude, this is a big province. There's more to it than just the Southern Island and the Lower Mainland, and people are legitimately terrified." Unless I'm missing some sort of politics. And then he's done this before, 2017, 2018. Fire season is nowhere near as bad as this, but not as bad as this. He triggered state of emergency. So clearly there are reasons to do it, but now all of a sudden he doesn't want to do it. And is it just politics because he wants a victory lap after COVID? Is it just he's tired of states of emergency? I don't know, but I do not understand the politics behind this one bit.
I've heard 3 theories about this, and the first is what you just outlaid, which is it's just simple fatigue, and there could be something to that. The second is that He is worried about the effect it will have on BC's tourism sector. No one's going to want to come to a province that's in a state of emergency. But as you say, if they're evacuating tourists from a Soyuz, whether it's an official state of emergency or not is going to leave an impression on those folks. And the third is kind of the one I hope is not true, because it's kind of the most damning. It's that the perception out there is that the BC Liberals have led this cry, and they have, because they represent so many of the ridings that have been so affected by this. They're the ones literally on the ground, that they don't want to see this as a win. And so they're saying, well, we don't need to do that. That's just politicking. We're going to marshal all the resources we would have if we did declare a state of emergency, but they're asking for it, so no. And my God, I hope that's not the case, because that is not a good way to play to make decisions. And again, lives are at stake.
You're exactly right. Like, that is so, it's parochial, it's mean, it's everything you hate about politicians if that third scenario is the case. And yet, you kind of wonder, right? Like, well, it's something. It's something. Something is preventing them, and I don't think anyone quite believes we'll do it when the local authorities call for it, because they are. They have called for it, and Indigenous leaders have called for it. And, it's very clear there is a chorus of voices wanting this. And former NDP candidates have called for it. A councillor in Kamloops who ran for the NDP with John Horgan in the last election and lost, but she's called for it. Like, I don't know how much more you need. And it's so weird too, because the NDP give a lot of lip service to worrying about the conditions that occur after climate change. They want to have an aggressive climate strategy, although the Greens would tell you they've done very little to actually advance it. But this is supposedly a bread and butter issue for the NDP, downplaying what many people regard as related to climate change doesn't make sense either for their long-term agenda. So. Yeah, I'll hand it to the BC Liberal MLAs. They've been all over this file. But I don't hand it to them because they're BC Liberals. Like, it's because they're in those ridings and living there, and they realize, right? The Jackie Taggarts of the world, although the Corley Oaks of the world, Shirley Bond, Dan Ashton last night, MLA for Penticton, tweeting that, sending out pictures of ash falling on cars in Penticton. Like, this is pretty grave situation that could get a lot worse very quickly. So you just do it, John Horgan. Like, I do not understand this stubbornness about it, and I don't buy into the fatigue issue, because government. Like, it's a $55 billion corporation. You can do more than one thing at once. And sure, you have some people resting after the long COVID drag here, but you can still do other things. Like, not every person in government was working on the COVID file full tilt for 18 months. Like, there are other people involved. I don't really understand either from, like, Mike Farnworth is a Solicitor General, Minister for Safety. Like, Farney is not an overly partisan guy. Like, compared to, he's partisan, but compared to some of them. But he's gotten kind of quiet on this file too. So, like, I just don't understand. Like, trigger it, get them the resources, or say, tell us what has changed since 2017, 2018 when you did trigger it. And you did make those wonderful statements about how it does muster resources and focus attention and blah, blah, blah. What has changed since then that you no longer have to do it? Because if you've done something spectacular behind the scenes that we don't know about, let's hear it. Like, now's the time to brag about it. But of course, they haven't. And this is why, you worry about the urban-rural divide anyways in BC. This just deepens it to almost an unsurmountable chasm between the two. I have family who live near Williams Lake, and they're like, you do not understand what it's like here. Like, people are legit terrified. Everyone has a bag ready to go. Reading Dee Dee's story, like, it's scary. And lots of people have already left, and they're kind of the ones who've remained are looking in on each other's property, trying to help. But that's not good. It's not good. So call the state of emergency. Just get on with it, and muster the power of the provincial government to help these people.
Yeah, well, I can't help but agree, and it's as I say, it's difficult to see the decision making process at work there. Speaking of difficult decisions,
let's just take it one more step, Maclean. Like, okay, so you're not doing it now. Lytton's burned to the ground. 2 people have died.
That's true.
There's X number of evacuation orders and alerts and people on standby. What does have to happen then for it to actually be triggered? Does a Soyuz have to burn? Does Oliver have to burn? Does Penticton have to be covered in 6 inches of ash? Does Kelowna have to be threatened? Or is it, someone on Vancouver Island has to be threatened in one of your heartland ridings for the NDP? Does someone in Souk actually have to smell smoke for it to happen? Like, this is what's so frustrating about this, is there's no logic to it. And that's why we all default to, wow, they're just punishing rural people for voting BC Liberal. And that is sick. And in my heart of hearts, I don't really believe that they're doing that. But, you look at that and you're like, what is the other option here? Like, why else would they be ignoring these folks?
No, I mean, that does seem to be the mood out there, is that people aren't saying, you're doing this because you don't care. It's just explain.
Yeah.
We don't get it. Like, just tell us. And that explanation has been, when it has come, it has been meandering and not exactly forthcoming, and it's very complicated. And I don't know, I can understand the frustration out there, and then, quite frankly, the fear. That's tough.
Look, I think with the difference between what happened in Fort Mac and Lytton was the speed. Fort Mac was fast. Lytton was even faster. And people got out of that town so fast they didn't even have time to stop and take the terrifying videos that we saw out of Fort Mac, which really, I think, seared itself into the national consciousness. And when people saw Fort Mac burning, whether you were pro-oil or not, whatever, you were like, holy smokes, that could be my town. That could be my little house. That could be my favorite coffee shop. And it really focused it. I think Lytton happened so fast. There's been such little video of it that maybe it didn't grab the consciousness the same way. But it's kind of sick to even say that, Maclean. Like, why do you have to see the images for it to actually matter? You don't, and that's why government needs to step up and say, we don't want to have another Lytton in Soyuz or Oliver or Vernon or Kamloops or wherever these fires are threatening.
Another very different problem that it does not, it affects people's lives, but not in a life and death kind of way, that also is not going away, is the Massey Tunnel replacement project, or lack thereof. We haven't gotten a business plan yet. Is there?
It exists.
I do have a theory. What's that?
It exists, apparently.
It exists. We're waiting for an announcement here. Before you jump in, my suggestion is this: if the NDP cannot convince Ottawa in its merry, and we're going to get to what's likely going to happen later this summer or this fall, if they cannot get them to chip in for whatever they want to do to replace the Massey Tunnel now, it's not going to happen. It's raining money from Ottawa right now, and now is the time to pounce. And if it doesn't happen now, it's never happening, not in the next 4 years.
Yeah. Now, look, I think Trudeau in the last election campaign made a promise that they'd be there to help fund the Massey Tunnel. I think I suspect the Conservatives will make the same promise. That's a swing riding. But you're right. There's two elements to this. First, there's the business plan, which has been in government hands since late last year, which Claire Trevena, then the transportation minister, and one of the worst ones in BC history, in my opinion, just my opinion, but I can say it. I can have an opinion. She promised it would be made public, and here we are, 8, 9, 10 months later, still not made public. We still don't know what's in it. Still don't know what they're recommending. Still don't know what the dollar amount is. All those things. Bear in mind, the much hated by the NDP, but not generally by normal people, the much hated Christie Clark Bridge, which had come in $900 million under the budgeted amount and was underway and then canceled by the NDP when they took power in 2017. It was scheduled to open next year. That bridge would be 75 to 80% complete. And you don't think that would add relief to drivers going into the scary Massey Tunnel to look over and see the bridge, progressing away and knowing that, that nightmare was going to be over in a few months or a year? Of course it would. So that was taken away. There's been, this concerted effort by the NDP to keep punting this down the line as far as they can. Canceling that bridge is probably going to set back the project by a decade. And we're no closer. And so, we've sent it to Ottawa to get federal funding. Look, that doesn't preclude you telling us what your plan is. Like, just tell us, okay, what year are you planning to start this? When's the funding? When are you hoping to have funding in place? Like, there's no reason not to tell us unless there's something in there that contradicts the NDP's longstanding spin on that issue, which, again, I'm a little, I don't know. I just think if you're going to do a business plan, it's going to render the result the cabinet wants to see. I think that's kind of how it works. But there must be a reason why they're holding this up. And I don't buy the funding excuse as the reason why.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to guess that the proposed solution is not going to be better than the one that was canceled, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah, look, and let's be clear, like
for those people who are waiting on it every day.
Yeah, the BC Liberal Bridge was supported by the Tsawwassen First Nation. They wanted that, not a replacement tunnel, because the replacement tunnel further disrupts salmon stocks in the Fraser River. They want to get rid of the tunnel. They wanted the bridge. For some reason, the NDP decided to side with the mayor of Richmond and say, no, we want a tunnel to replace, not a bridge. But that creates a whole bunch of other engineering issues. You need completely different environmental approvals. Like, this set it back a long way. Plus, again, we're in the era of UNDRIP. What the Indigenous leaders want has to matter in planning like this. So I have no idea what this thing is going to recommend. I suspect it'll be a tunnel. I suspect that it's another way for them to punt it down the road by, having an unnecessary fight with the Tsawwassen First Nation. But I guess we'll see. I want to compare it to another bridge, on the other end of the province, in the other corner. Taylor Bridge over the Peace River near Taylor, BC, and then further up is Dawson Creek and Fort St. John. Very important people mover. If that bridge fails, you're talking about a 2-hour detour for every commercial good piece of traffic resident going from the South Peace to the North Peace or vice versa. It's 60-something years old now. It's falling apart. It desperately needs to be replaced, not just from a safety point of view, but from a capacity point of view. And again, the NDP are punting that down the road. They've kind of been dragging their heels, and now they've struck another a technical advisory committee, but it's not really a technical advisory committee. It's like, we want more public opinion. Well, the public opinion is clear. Replace the bridge. That is what the people want. But again, it's another way to kind of punt it down. And you sort of wonder, right? What do those two things have in common? One was a BC Liberal project at Massey. One is in BC Liberal ridings in the northeast of BC. Seems mighty mean-spirited or coincidental, I guess, of the NDP to be punting on both of these.
On the Taylor Bridge, our Frank Peebles wrote about that project, or lack thereof, last year. And if you aren't familiar with the bridge, I don't think I've ever been across it, or even the region or the necessity, you should read Frank's piece. And he talks to a lot of the truckers and that who go over it every day, and they're pretty clear. This is falling apart. It's not like we want a nicer bridge, or it'd be great if it was wider and we could go faster. That's not what this is. The quotes are literally, I just don't want to be the one driving over it when it finally falls, because it's gonna.
Yeah.
And it's a little scary. We've used this word already today, but if it's a bridge is falling apart and it's primarily used for heavy trucking, it's not a good combination. So one hopes that can get moved up the pile, but it doesn't look like that's happening. And
if you haven't seen the bridge, because there's so much snow there, they've built it in a way so that essentially the bridge deck is grates, so little squares so the snow can fall through, so it doesn't accumulate on the bridge. But that does, you're trading off one engineering issue for another, right? That is hard to keep in good, sturdy form. So yeah, it's time to get that built. It's time to get both these bridges built and approved. This is core infrastructure. This is infrastructure that not just serves residents, although that's important, but serves commercial interests. Obviously the Massey Tunnel, Delta Port is there. That is an important, it's an important route in and out of Richmond. London Drugs is already moving their operations out of Richmond because they're tired of their trucks being tied up at the tunnel. So these are important issues. And then Taylor Bridge, same thing. That is vitally important for supplying the northeast of BC, which in turn supplies us with a ton of energy that keeps British Columbia running. So we owe it to these folks to get these projects replaced as quickly as possible.
Speaking of fights that you weren't expecting to talk about today, I don't think there's much of an update in terms of the BC Liberal leadership race, but something interesting came out of one of the camps, and that is Ellis Ross. He's going to fight to keep the name, keep calling BC BC, to keep calling it British Columbia. There have been calls to rename it. There are objections to both the British and the Columbia part. Not surprising these days. Ellis Ross is kind of the first of any politician I've seen to really stake out a position on this by simply saying no. And let's just acknowledge the elephant in the room. It's significant that this is coming from an Indigenous leader, right? That's not this isn't Joe Angry from Victoria saying, "Oh, we're going to keep BC." This is an Indigenous person. He's a Haisla leader, and it's an interesting thing to talk about, because I have seen calls on social media that the name of the province is inappropriate and must change. Now, Ellis Ross disagrees.
Yeah, so I was surprised when I saw it in my email inbox this morning. He specifically says the term cancel culture. Interesting issue for him to pick up on. This is the kind of stuff you kind of expect from the Aaron Guns of the world, maybe. But to have it from Ellis, very interesting tact by his campaign. I'll be curious. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. It's a list building exercise. I think there's a survey on it attached to it, right? Click here for a survey. Do you support keeping BC as BC? Of course, right? Click, But it is part of that overall interaction. And I will say, of all of the campaigns, and I'm getting all their emails, Ellis's have been generally the most intriguing might not be the right word. Attention grabbing, maybe.
Yeah.
The ones that make me pause and go, oh, wait a minute. What's he saying? Well, that's interesting. And so there is value in that when you consider there's, I think, 5 Kents in the race now and 1 or 2 more to come, or 4 in the race, 1 or 2 more to come. You get this deluge of email, but you go, oh, wait a minute. That's interesting. And he stopped me 2 or 3 times in my tracks as I've been, deleting emails. So kudos to the campaign for that. I mean, that's all you can hope for in an email campaign.
Yeah, and it's one of those issues that, I mean, if you spend too much time online, you might think is controversial. But I submit that if you took an ordinary poll of, even in Victoria, where I am today, the number of people who have, renaming the province as high on their list of priorities is vanishingly small. And that's before you even get into the thorny issue of, okay, great, what are we going to call it?
Yeah.
And that's where it's going to get really complicated. But, I mean, I just don't see this as something that's going to ever happen. I don't think enough people want it, and I think doing it would be so much of a hassle that it's just, look, no one calls it British Columbia. The province is called BC. Right. Who objects to BC?
Exactly. No, I agree. And I think the only people, you might be able to get a majority on, say, someone, a crazy group like Victoria City Council or something, but the rest of us normal humans, it's not on our radar at all. In fact, the first time I heard about it was a piece on the Orca by Mark Milkey. And he picked up on some of the social media chatter in the lefty groups. And I was like, no, this can't be right. And then I looked it up, and yeah, sure enough, this is what some of these so-called progressives are chattering away about. And I was very surprised to think that this could be a real thing. So yeah, again, the Orca, shaping the way I'm reading my news and what I'm learning about.
That's what we're looking to do. Speaking of shaping, look, we all know, speaking of elephants in the room and shaping, we all know there's an election coming in the next few months. Mm-hmm. But the question is, when in the next few months? I think you are about to make a prediction that it might come earlier than we had thought. Am I right about that?
I'm not making a prediction, but the hot rumor is that Liberal staffers have been called back to Ottawa for August 8th. And that, very quickly thereafter, we could be plunged into an election campaign, which would be just the worst. Like a summer election campaign, Maclean. Like, oh my God. Like, I just can't even get my head around that. It seems
no one
like
wants it.
At first I thought, well, maybe he'll call it right after Labor Day. Like, maybe he calls it right after Labor Day. But now it sounds like he may call it in August in order to have the vote by, mid to late September. That is just, why? Like, the question I can't get around is, okay, Prime Minister, what is it you want to do that you haven't been able to do with this particular House of Commons? Because it seems to me that they have fallen over themselves to keep you in power. Like, the NDP are surrendering left, right, and center. The Bloc go along with, you've been able to stitch together a coalition on pretty much everything except maybe Bill C-10. But even then, you got it passed into the Senate's hands. What are they preventing you from doing? But this is just another example of kind of the John Horgan school of thought, which is, it's better than power, more power. And so off they go to a selfish, pointless, ridiculously expensive election call.
And I wonder if the reason for rushing it this summer rather than having it in the fall when more people would be paying attention is, I wonder if they're, have half an eye at places like Australia, where they've seen, Australia had much stricter lockdowns than we did here, and they're going back into lockdowns because numbers did kind of pop up again. The nightmare scenario for the Liberals is they make this a pandemic election in that, well, this is, look what a great job we did keeping care of you during the pandemic. When case counts are spiking, when people are going back into hospitals, when provinces are starting to think, we have to shut down malls and maybe even schools again, in Ontario. So I wonder if they're thinking we better get while the going's good.
Yeah, that's a good point. Is there a fourth wave coming? You're seeing it in an uptick in some places in the States, although you no longer can really compare vaccination rates between the two countries. Yeah, logic says, look, we go back indoors, kids go back to school, that there will be more cases again in the fall. Hopefully not enough to lock us down. But I guess that's a good point. But man, that's crass. That's some crass kind of politics. And maybe that's the theme of today's episode, Maclean. It's like there are some crass, selfish, politics first decisions being made. You and I are by no means doe-eyed optimists, newbies when it comes to politics, but it's like the evidence is starting to mount here on all these different things. I, for one, am in no rush to have a federal election, although my daughter is, because it'll be the first election she gets to vote in, having turned 18 in May.
I do remember my first vote, and that was a big deal. So, I mean, I'm happy for her. I just wish that she had to wait a bit longer.
Yeah. Look, there's a municipal election next year. That's a perfectly appropriate first vote. There's no problem. So.
Yeah, and maybe not as, what's the word?
Sexy?
Sexy? Yeah, there you go. Especially in Langley. I have no idea. Here, well, who knows? Victoria's municipal elections are an event.
Thinking of renting a place 30 days before the vote just so I can vote against Ben Isett.
If he runs again, we'll see. Who knows? It's not been a good week for him either.
I gotta say, we've talked about him before, but Adam Sterling, man, he's doing the Lord's work. Like, there is no one in...
he is the official opposition.
Yeah, there's no one on radio. Yep. And I love there are a lot of great radio hosts. Jody and George filling in have been fantastic. In fact, I heard an interview between Jody and Ellis Ross driving home last week. I meant to send Jody a note. I should still do it. It was one of the best political interviews I've heard in a long time on the radio. And she got him to open up a little bit about his personal experience. And it was more about, him. It was around the time of Safe Supply. And so that announcement coming out. So he was kind of introspective about, the challenges he had overcome in his life with drugs and alcohol and that sort of thing. And I think at one point I heard Ellis choke up a little bit, which, he's an emotional guy. That's fine. And it was kind of cool to hear. There's an authenticity to that. So I got to send a note to Jody if she's not watching that. I thoroughly enjoyed that interview. But anyways, all that to say, radio hosts, there's no one moving the needle on local politics anywhere like Adam Sterling is doing. He is a force of nature. If I were a Victoria councillor, I'd be terrified that he was going to turn his scrutiny on me. He is doing a fantastic job. So kudos to friend of the show, Adam Sterling.
It's never been a less boring time to live in Victoria. I can confirm that. But as you can hear from my voice, I don't know how much longer I can confirm anything.
Right.
So unless you have more, I haven't had a cold in a year, more than a year, 16 months. I've almost forgotten what this is like.
Yeah, so now you're staying home, you're sequestering yourself from people, all of that, wearing your mask if you do go out in public. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
One last thing, I think on masks, I think I noticed more people this weekend than last not wearing them. They're starting to get to be a bit more of a comfort level at the grocery store and places like that. And I gotta admit, I went out somewhere and forgot mine, and that was okay. I didn't need it. So it's just interesting to see how public opinion on this is slowly starting to go back towards let's demask and.
Well, especially in the summer and outside. Yeah. I quite agree. Now, again, if I go out today, and I'm not planning to, I will mask.
Yeah.
And I'm fine with that. I think masking when you're sick is a thing we could keep doing pretty much forever. I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't. It's a cold. It's not the end of the world. But why? Why infect someone else? Why not protect them by wearing a mask? It just doesn't. I mean, you can hear, dear listeners, that I have a little cold, and so there's no reason for me to terrify someone I bump into on the street.
Totally. All right. That's all I wanted to say.
All right.
Good.
Until next week, he's Jordan Bateman. I'm Maclean K. Happy politics.